The story you are about to hear is a compilation of documented true facts featuring historical characters, events, or places that has played a role in shaping history. Please sit back and listen as I recite this narrative for you. Charles Edmund Cullen is an American serial killer. He confessed to authorities that he killed up to 40 patients during the course of his 16-year career as a nurse in New Jersey. However, in subsequent interviews with police, psychiatrists, and journalists, it became apparent that he had killed many more, whom he could not specifically remember by name, though he could often remember details of their murders. Experts have estimated that Cullen may ultimately be responsible for 400 deaths, which would make him the most prolific serial killer in recorded history. Charles Cullen was born on February 22, 1960 in West Orange, New Jersey, the youngest of 8 children in a deeply religious Catholic family. His father was a bus driver, and his mother stayed at home to raise her children. Cullen's father died when Cullen was an infant. Cullen has described his childhood as miserable and being constantly bullied by his sister's boyfriends and his schoolmates. When he was 9, he made the first of 20 suicide attempts throughout his life. Later working as a nurse, Cullen claimed to have fantasized about stealing drugs from the hospital where he worked and using them to end his life. In one attempt, he took a pair of scissors and jabbed them through his head. He was rushed to the hospital to have major surgery done. Cullen's mother, Florence, was killed in a car accident in 1977 when he was in his junior year of high school. He recalled her death as being devastating and being upset that the hospital would not return her body, instead having it cremated. The following year, he dropped out of high school and enlisted in the U.S. Navy. Cullen rose to the rank of Petty Officer 3rd Class as a part of the team that operated the ship's Poseidon missiles. Cullen showed signs of mental instability at this time. A year into his service, his leading petty officer discovered him seated at the controls for the missiles, wearing a surgical mask, gloves, and scrubs rather than his uniform. Cullen was disciplined for this action, but never explained why he dressed the way he did. Cullen tried to kill himself several times over the next few years. His last attempt led to his discharge from the Navy in March 1984. However, the exact reason for it has not been disclosed. After leaving the Navy, Cullen attended Mountainside School of Nursing and got a job at St. Barnabas Medical Center in Livingston, New Jersey in 1987. That same year, he married Adrienne Taub. The couple had 2 daughters. Their daughter Shauna was born later that year. Cullen's wife became increasingly disturbed at his unusual behavior and abuse of the family dogs. Cullen committed his first murder on June 11, 1988. Judge John W. Yengo Sr. had been admitted to St. Barnabas Medical Center, suffering from an allergic reaction to a blood-thinning drug. Cullen administered a lethal overdose of medication intravenously. Cullen admitted to killing 11 patients at St. Barnabas, including an AIDS patient who died after being given an overdose of insulin. Cullen quit his job at St. Barnabas in January 1992 when hospital authorities began investigating who might have tampered with bags of intravenous fluid. In January the next year, his wife filed for divorce, having reported him twice for domestic violence. She later filed 2 domestic violence complaints against him. The divorce paper and domestic violence complaints depicted Cullen as an alcoholic, someone who abused pets by placing them in bowling bags and trash cans, poured lighter fluid into other people's drinks, and made prank calls to funeral homes. Cullen had shared custody of his daughters and moved into a basement apartment on Schaffer Avenue in Phillipsburg. 2 months later, he broke into the apartment of a nurse he had dated and her son. After being arrested, he pleaded guilty to trespassing and received 1 year's probation. Though he wanted to quit working as a nurse, he had to continue to afford the child support he had to pay. In spite of his odd employment record, he had no problems finding work due to a nationwide lack of nurses. Another reason was that, at that time, there was no form of registry that kept track of nurses with mental problems. He quit his job at the Warren Hospital and began working at the intensive care or cardiac care unit of the Hunter Dunn Medical Center in Flemington, where he killed at least 5 people during his last 9 months of employment. Cullen found work at Morris Memorial Hospital in Morris, New Jersey. He was fired in August 1997 for poor performance. He remained unemployed for 6 months and stopped making child support payments. He found a job at the Liberty Nursing and Rehabilitation Center in Allentown, Pennsylvania. As the years passed by, his debts mounted, in part because he was unable to pay his child support. In May, Cullen filed for bankruptcy, claiming nearly $67,000 in debts. Liberty fired Cullen in October 1998 after he was seen entering a patient's room with syringes in his hand. The patient ended up with a broken arm, but apparently no injections were made. Cullen was accused of giving patients drugs at unscheduled times. Over the course of the next 2 years, Cullen worked at 3 different hospitals. There were no suspicions that he was a killer until a co-worker of his at the St. Barnabas Hospital in Allentown, Pennsylvania, found a stash of unused medications in a trash can. It was considered suspicious because the drugs had no recreational use or any value outside the hospital. Cullen was identified as the thief and was fired in June 2002. An investigation into the many deaths that had occurred on Cullen's watch was started by the Lehigh County District Attorney's Office with some other nurses with whom Cullen had worked as witnesses. Though he had been present at over 50% of the deaths and only worked 20% of the available hours, no background check on him was done, and the investigation was shut down after 9 months due to a lack of evidence. Cullen then got a nursing job at the critical care unit of the Somerset Medical Center in Somerville, New Jersey. He committed most of his confirmed murders there. In 2003, his criminal behavior became increasingly apparent. He would look into the records of patients he wasn't treating and would administer to patients drugs which they had not been prescribed. In July the same year, at least 4 of the suspicious overdoses indicated the possibility that an employee was killing patients, but the hospital put off contacting authorities until October. By then, Cullen had killed another 5 patients and attempted to kill a 6th. He then proceeded to have sex with the victims. State officials penalized the hospital for failing to report a non-fatal insulin overdose in August. The overdose had been administered by Cullen. When Cullen's final victim died of low blood sugar in October, the medical center alerted state authorities. An investigation into Cullen's employment history revealed past suspicions about his involvement with prior deaths. On October 31st, he was fired for lying in his job application. Police kept him under surveillance for several weeks until they had finished their investigation. On December 12, Cullen was arrested following a 2-month-long investigation of him by the authorities. He was charged with the murder of Reverend Florian J. Gao and the attempted murder of Jin Kyung Han. Cullen didn't make any resistance and not only pleaded guilty to both counts, but confessed to several more murders during his past hospital jobs. In April and July of 2004, he confessed to a total of 29 murders and 6 attempted, though he admitted that he couldn't remember all of his murders. It is very possible that he has in fact killed many, many more. Some place his total number of murders at over 400. He avoided the death penalty through a plea bargain with the prosecution and is currently serving a sentence of life in prison without the possibility of parole at the New Jersey State Prison in Trenton, New Jersey. His killings and the fact that he was able to move from hospital to hospital without raising any suspicion also had an impact on the U.S. legal system regarding hospitals. The penalties for hospitals for failing to report suspicious fatalities became harsher. Hospitals that report poor staff performance now have better legal defense options, and hospital workers are now required to undergo background checks for criminal records and also to register their fingerprints. During interrogation, Cullen claimed to have killed his victims to keep them from getting coded, a reference to Code Blue, a hospital term for cardiac arrest. He felt that if they had, they would have become dehumanized. He also felt that the hospital managements were to blame for many of his murders, arguing that they should have stopped him from killing when they had the chance. He also claimed, like many angels of death, that he killed his victims in order to put them out of their suffering. However, not all of his victims were terminal patients. Some, like Gal, had been expected to recover before Cullen killed them. Nurse Lynn Tester described many of the victims as people on demand in a police interview. Instead of using common painkillers and stimulants, access of which was strictly regulated by hospitals due to their value as street drugs, Cullen chose instead to use as his tools of choice drugs such as digoxin and insulin, which had little use outside of a hospital setting and were less likely to attract attention. Investigators stated that Cullen may have caused patients to suffer, but that he appears not to realize this, contradicting his claims of wanting to save patients. Similarly, Cullen told investigators that although he often observed patients suffering for several days, the decision to commit each murder was performed on impulse.
Did you inject Ms. Stoker with any medication?
Yes.
And was it your intent to cause her to expire?
Yes.
And what agent did you use to accomplish that intent?
The Jackson.
Hey everyone! I just wanted to express how grateful I am that you took the time to listen to my narration. Hopefully you enjoyed it. I am Twisted Mind and please enjoy the rest of your day. Salamat!